Well, toward the end of my contract in Libya, um, I had an experience that was really interesting. It didn't really influence me much at the time, but it did later. Um, One of the things I regret was that when I was in Libya, I had an opportunity to learn about Islam. I worked with Islamic workers, and they were friendly, and some of them spoke English, and it was an opportunity to learn about their culture and their religion. I think I was kind of negative toward religion. I was amused by it and wondered about it. I had been in Germany several months before I'd gotten down to Libya, working in the oil field there, and I saw people from the Catholic Church. I saw nuns with very strange habits, that is, clothing, attractive-looking clothing, but very different than anything I'd seen in the States. I saw priests. There were cathedrals everywhere. There's a lot of religious artifacts. In Libya, everything is Islamic, and but the fact was, even though I saw these things, I didn't really ask any questions about it, and I don't think I found any interest within my own heart to pursue learning more about it. I regret that now. But I did have one experience before I left Libya that was significant later. I was in a particular drilling camp. Books were scarce. If you could find a book, it was valuable. And there were a lot of cowboy and western books. Most of these guys were from Texas and Oklahoma. There were all kinds of books, but not many of them. But I happened to be in a trailer. It was in the afternoon. I was taking a nap, and the door opened, and one of the rig hands stood at the door. I couldn't see who it was. The sun was shining in. But he said, "Here's a book you ought to read." And he threw the book through this open door, and it landed on my chest. I'm lying on my back in bed, and then he walked off. And it was kind of startling, and I wondered, I don't even know that guy. And anyway, I picked the book up, and it was a short book, and it was A Man Called Peter. I didn't know anything about Peter Marshall. Turned out he was the Senate chaplain at one point, but he was a Scotsman, a minister. And I didn't have anything to do. You look for things to read from time to time, so I decided I'd read it. It was kind of a biography. So I did read it, and I found it hard to identify with this guy. He was very religious. He was a minister. He loved God, and none of those things were part of my life. But I did read it. But there were two questions that arose inside me that were left unresolved after reading that book. But later, I was confronted with them. The first one was, when he was living in Scotland, he was walking from one village to another. I don't remember all the details precisely, but it was at night. It was really dark, and there was a path that led between the two villages. The path went right alongside a limestone quarry, and it was deep. And, of course, the path being close to the edge was kind of dangerous. He'd walked that path many times, apparently, and he knew it pretty well. But on this particular night, he's walking, and it was cloudy, it was dark. And for some reason, as he walked along in the dark, without a flashlight or anything, although it was on a familiar path to him, he had a sense that he had to stop. He didn't hear a voice, he just sensed he had to stop. And he tried to take a step forward to continue moving, and strangely enough, he couldn't do it. He couldn't move his legs to go forward. And he was puzzled and perplexed and angry, and he couldn't figure it out. Now, all this happened in seconds. It seemed like an eternity. But he finally looked down, and had he taken one more step, he would have stepped off the edge of the cliff right into that quarry. And it was many, many feet down there. He would have been killed. His conclusion was that God had spared him. He believed, first of all, there was a God. And then he believed that God protected him. Well, that was strange for me. I didn't believe necessarily that there was a God, and if there was, would he keep people from falling off a cliff? It was just a strange idea. But it kind of grabbed me and left me with, well, I wonder if that's true. Well, the second thing was he had met a young woman and fell in love with her, and she with him. And they were very serious in pursuing their relationship, and marriage was one of the things they talked about. But he couldn't move forward in making a decision to marry this young woman until he actually prayed about it and got some kind of message from God. Yeah, that's the thing to do. Go forward. And he waited until he got what he said was a go-ahead from God to marry a woman. Well, that really perplexed me, because I thought if man is sovereign in any area of life, it's got to be marriage. You don't ask anybody else if you should marry so-and-so. I couldn't conceive of anybody saying, hey, should I marry this woman? I just couldn't. That didn't compute with me at all, and much less to ask God if marriage was an appropriate decision. Well, I'll leave that story with you at this point. It did leave me with a question. Does God exist? And does he protect people from falling into quarries? And is it a reasonable, rational response for a man to ask God if he should marry so-and-so? Interesting questions. Talk about it later.